Welcome, everyone. Thank you for attending tonight's event. I'm Terry Wadalevich. I am the Youth Services Librarian at Lansing Community Library. We're so excited to bring the Big Read program to Lansing. The Big Read program is sponsored by the National Endowment for the Arts, and the veteran panel discussion this evening is being brought to us by the Kansas Humanities Council. We had received a grant from the Humanities Council to present the Big Read, one of 6 libraries in the state. The council is a nonprofit organization which promotes understanding of the history and ideas that shape lives and strengthens our sense of community. So that we all may enjoy the program, I would appreciate it if everyone would take a moment to turn off or silent their cell phones. Dr. Kim Stanley is joining us this evening to serve as our moderator for the discussion. She is currently the chair for the Modern Languages Department at McPherson College. She has an extensive research experience in literature of the Vietnam era. And thank you, Dr. Stanley, for taking the time to come visit. And with that, I turn the floor over to you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. Welcome, everybody, and welcome to our guests. Thank you so much for your time, for joining us today.
Fun.
As you have heard, and I'm sure as you already know, this project is part of the Big Read, and I should mention to you, so good? That's all right. There we go. Okay. I'll try to be louder. I should mention to you that the book that we're using is Tim O'Brien's The Things They Carried, although we won't be discussing it directly tonight. Of course, the discussion is connected. O'Brien won the Pritzker Military Award for Lifetime Achievement in Military Writing, and he won the National Book Award for another Vietnam novel, Going After Cacciato. I'll mention some things that O'Brien brings up in The Things They Carried, and I'll refer to the main character in the novel, the narrator, as Tim O'Brien, because that is who he calls the narrator. And in fact, the novel is very, very much like his memoir, If I Die in a Combat Zone, Box Me Up and Ship Me Home. So it's very similar. The stories are very similar. So, okay, so first of all, I want to introduce to you our gracious veterans who have attended to help us this evening. And luckily they are in the order in which they appear in my notes. And so, and so here we have General Stanley Cherry. Stanley Cherry went from being a 2-sport star at Rutgers University to be an officer in the U.S. Army. He earned a bachelor's degree in psychology while competing as a starting catcher in baseball and an offensive guard and linebacker on the football team. A whirlwind military career saw him rise from second lieutenant to brigadier general. Stan had 2 assignments in Vietnam, and stop me if I get something wrong, okay?
No, that's enough right there.
Oh, I've got good stuff here. I've got good stuff.
You're doing good so far, but that's okay. You can stop right there.
I'm not lying yet. He had 2 assignments in Vietnam during the war years, as well as tours in Germany, Saudi Arabia, and Bosnia-Herzegovina. He has earned a long list of awards and decorations: Distinguished Medal, Service Medal, Silver Star, Distinguished Superior Service Medal, and Legion of Merit. General David D. McKiernan said that Stan, quote, is respected throughout the Army as a great tactician and operational thinker. During Operation Desert Storm, he was the architect of the largest armored division offensive since World War II, which ultimately was the decisive battle of the campaign. Stan retired from the Army in April 1998 after nearly 34 years of service. He retired as Vice President of Business Synchronization for Cubic Applications, Inc. in Leavenworth, Kansas, more recently, right? That was your second retirement.
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
Our second panelist is Sharon Scott. Sharon served in the U.S. Army from 73 to 93 for 20 years, retired as a lieutenant colonel. She was in the first group of WACs to integrate into other Army branches. Changing into the Signal Corps, she was one of a group of 7 women who were the first women to attend the Signal Officer Basic Course. But it was not her only time as the first woman. So she's been a first woman many times. Okay. She was the first woman to command a company of signal soldiers, both men and women. and a signal battalion and brigade in Korea during the Vietnam era. During her career, she worked for many senior male officers who had never served with women. She says that this was quite a challenge. Come in and join us. Hi. Okay. In the early 80s, she served as a battalion executive officer, deputy commander, as a battalion commander. She was involved in real-world planning as a multi-service communications planning officer on a major military staff. Another first for Sharon was her service as one of 3 women officers who were the first to teach a captain's staff officer course here in Leavenworth. She has a master's and most of a PhD at the University of Kansas in curriculum and instruction. After her retirement from active duty, she's been a government contractor and an assistant professor at the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College. She developed curriculum for them and taught many courses to military officers, interagency students, and international officers as well. So welcome, Sharon. And then Terry Buckler was the youngest member. He was the youngest member of a joint group of volunteers from the Green Beret, the Army Green Beret, and the Air Force Special Ops that conducted the Son Tay raid into North Vietnam in 1970, which you may have heard of. The Son Tay raid is one of the 7 most daring raids in military history, with U.S. troops going deep into North Vietnam, 23 miles from Hanoi, which you may remember as the capital of the enemy part of Vietnam, of North Vietnam, to raid a POW camp. And the raid was successful. The POWs had mostly been moved to another place, but they didn't lose any of the men, and it was 27 minutes, something amazing like that. Right?
About that.
About that. Terry grew up on a farm in Clark, Missouri, which is the same town where General Omar Bradley was born. So it's a distinguished little town, right? Life on the farm taught him to work hard and to believe that dedication to God, family, and country are what make this country great. In 1969, he was drafted into the U.S. Army. 3 days later, he decided to become a member of the Army Green Berets. He is the current president of the Special Forces Association Colonel Arthur D. Bull Simmons Memorial Chapter 29, and they just had a reunion. And I think there are 35, you said, of the members of the 56 members of the raid who are still with us. Right. This is good.
56.
Okay.
We had about 15 at the reunion.
At the reunion.
Right.
And they have 2 POWs who join them sometimes.
7.
Seven.
POWs.
Okay. Terry and his wife Marcia have 2 children, a son Aaron and a daughter Hannah. And Hannah and her husband Nick both served in Afghanistan and are still in the Army. Aaron, his son, and his wife Gail have a 6-year-old daughter, Annie. After his enlistment, Terry attended Columbia College in Missouri, earned a BA in business. He is the founder and president of Delta Systems, a Kansas City-based software development company. His military awards include a Silver Star, a Combat Infantry Badge, a Vietnam Service Medal, a Parachute Badge, and a Good Conduct Medal. So welcome to you, Terry. We're glad to have you here.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. I would like to ask you first about how you entered the military. In the book, The Things They Carried.
Handcuffed.
Okay.
Voluntary.
Well, in the Things They Carried, the author reveals that he didn't want to be drafted and go to Vietnam. In fact, he tried to make himself go to Canada, but he was worried about disgracing his family and how his little town in Minnesota would feel, you know. So, could you guys talk about how you started for us? So, Terry, tell us about that.
Well, I was, as I said, I was drafted, and that was in 1969. Can you everyone hear me all right? Okay.
Yeah, put this up so maybe.
See, is this mic
Yeah,
for
your mic
recording?
there. If the green light's on, you're on.
Okay. I had gone to college and ran out of money and went to work in a factory. And at that time, when you lost your deferment, you kind of jumped to the top of the list. So I went up to see the draft board to see where I was going to be, and they said it'd probably be a couple of months. And I said, well, put me in the next batch. And the next thing I knew, I was in Kansas City, Missouri at the draft getting the physical, and went from here down to Fort Leonard Wood and decided that if I was going to go to Vietnam, I'm going to go to the best. So I volunteered for Special Forces, and kind of the rest is history.
Okay. Well, it is history.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I was fortunate enough to be a daughter of a father who was in the service.
Okay.
And we traveled. I went to high school in Japan and then in Texas. And then I got my degree in Texas and got my degree in secondary education, because back then women just, we were expected to do certain things, and I still hadn't figured out what I wanted to do. So I taught high school for about 3 years, and that's usually the time we start thinking about moving. So I left teaching and joined the Army. I was accepted by all services, but I chose the Army, one, because I knew I couldn't serve on board ship, which women couldn't do then.
Right.
And I didn't choose the Air Force because I didn't want to be just an administrator.
Right.
And so I chose the Army so I could do something different.
What drew you to the Signal Corps?
No choice.
Oh, really?
I was in the WAC and Women's Army Corps. I was in the very first group of women who weren't considered WAC officers from basic course to graduation, or to when you started your career. We were in what they call an orientation course, and then from there we found out we were going to get to go to the other branches of the Army.
Okay.
And of course I wanted to go infantry. Well, that was no way. So
Still working on it.
I know you
Still
are.
working on that.
I keep hoping. So I put down military intelligence and military police, and they gave me signal.
And they gave you Signal.
And they sent me back to Fort McClellan after my signal basic to train troops. I was a PE teacher.
Oh, were you really?
Yeah,
So-
that's, most of us who were sent back
Yeah.
to WAC Center at that time were PE teachers.
That kind of makes
It's
you-
amazing.
Yeah, it makes the infantry make sense, doesn't it, if you're a PE teacher? Okay, yes.
I entered the Army as an adjunct to a college, getting a college education. But when I look back at all the things I did as a kid, even in my Cub Scout scrapbook and everything, I always wanted to fly.
Oh,
I didn't think I was qualified to fly a fast mover, so the Army helicopter pilot sounded good to me. Learned how to fly I went to Rutgers to learn how to fly at Rutgers. My goal was to become a helicopter pilot, serve 3 years in the Army, and then get a teaching certificate and be just like my algebra teacher and coach high school football for the rest of my life. That's all I want to do. They then sent me out to Fort Lewis after airborne school to a cavalry squadron. They gave me 3 tanks, 2 scout sections, a mortar track, a mortar squad, infantry squad. They paid for the fuel, the ammunition, they fed me. I was making $220 a month, and I thought it can't get any better than this. So that was my road to my dream of being a pilot. And after that, I went to flight school, and I just decided. I decided when I was a lieutenant in the cavalry squadron that I wanted to stay in the Army. I just nothing else suited me.
good.
Yeah.
Okay, very, very good, very
Mhm.
interesting. You folks all have varied experiences in the
Mhm.
military, but you've all done some service abroad, either in wartime or or otherwise. And so I wanted to ask you about that service. In your wartime service, could you pick a day, like a typical day? What would it be like? What would you do on that day? What would a typical day in your service abroad be like? Something that would give us an impression of what it was like to be there. Anybody can say.
Tense.
Tense? Tense?
No sleep.
And no sleep.
Yeah, I was at that time. I'm thinking this is later than these gentlemen were. In 1975, when Vietnam supposedly fell, as the term was used. I ran the Seoul Korea Telecommunications Center,
Mhm.
which was the second hub next to the one in Vietnam.
Oh.
So when the one in Vietnam fell, my comm center got hit. As far as we were getting 10,000 messages a
Wow.
day on the average for
Wow.
about 3 weeks in April '75 and into May, and we ran 24-hour shifts anyway, but we had a team is called a trick.
Right.
So I had 3 tricks normally you have about 8 to 10 people on each trick. We had 20 on each trick
Wow.
during that time frame. And this is when everybody was waiting to receive message traffic about what was happening and that kind of stuff. And at the same time, one of my soldiers' wives was killed in Vietnam.
Oh, no.
So it was just, for me, that one day I won't forget. It was pretty bragging for me
Right,
and the
right.
soldiers.
Right, day and night. and-
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, thank you.
Mhm.
Go ahead, sir.
For me, it was, it started out rather slowly. We were a brand-new company, about 200 people, in typical UH-1 Huey helicopters you see in all the war movies. And I was an armed helicopter gunship driver, so we were into escort duty. And it was pretty much, you did the same thing just about every day. You got up at about 5 o'clock in the morning, cleaned up, ate a little breakfast, went to the flight briefing. You'd had a briefing the night before, out to the helicopter pre-flight. Then we would fly down in the Delta, and it was pick up troops, insert troops, and you see the helicopters all coming into formation. And then the gunships would stay on station. And we used to kind of kidding around, say it was hours and hour of boredom, punctuated with instances of, but it was, you really felt after a while, this was when Vietnam was in May of 67 to May of 68, and in February of 68, Tet Offensive, that
Right.
kind of changed things a little bit. So, but you did feel that you were part of an organization that was doing what you were pretty much isolated. Although they had TV there and you saw the news at night, you were pretty much isolated from all the anti-war things that were going on back home. You were part of an organization that was doing what you thought your country wanted you to do, and we felt we were doing pretty well at it also, and and we were pretty proud while we were doing it, that we were doing what was right and playing by the rules.
Right.
And I can remember coming home feeling that, I'm glad that year's over.
Right.
And I knew I was going back, but you felt, it was a long, long year being away from the family, and my son was born while I was there.
Oh.
So I was now a family man, so that changed the complexion. But I can't say it was a good feeling, but you were proud of it. You worked hard,
Right.
and that's a good feeling when you work hard.
You could look back and be proud that you
Oh,
had
yeah.
done this and,
Yep.
yeah,
Mhm.
good, okay.
Mine's a little interesting. I was never in combat before, and we had trained for 3 months in a secured area. We knew we were on some type of special mission, just the fact that when we volunteered, it was told it was a moderately hazardous mission, in the Bull Simon's words. They came in, got us in a room about twice the size of this, and Bull Simons and Colonel Sidner came down and said were going to tell us where we were going. They pulled down a big map of North Vietnam and showed us North Vietnam and showed us South Vietnam, and said, that's where we're going, and we're leaving in about 2 hours.
Oh, man.
And they estimated 20 to 80,000 NVA in our area,
Yeah.
and they told us it was a 50-50 chance of not coming back. And if you wanted to walk out the door, now's the time to do it. Well, at that time, what happened was an uproar of men were just excited to, much like the general was saying, you trained for 3 months to do what you know that's your job. Everybody was happy about it. We had a 3.5-hour flight in from Tak Lee Air Force to U Dorn on into South Vietnam, or North Vietnam. And 20 years old, never been in combat. And the fact that they told you had a 50-50 chance of not coming back is, kind of works on your mind a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
And, you had a lot of time to think about your life. 20 years is not much to think at that time. Going back, got a little more to think about now. But
When you're 20, it is.
yeah, and
Just start.
but the high of being told what you were going to do, and then having done the mission and come back. That was November 20th. In 21, we flew in, did our job, and came back. And then we went from a very high euphoria of just knowing that what we were going to go do is rescue American POWs, and then not to have caught the fact that they were all moved was very disappointing. So we went from a high to a low to back to a high because we didn't lose anyone.
Right. Two slightly wounded, isn't that right?
One.
One.
Yeah,
One. So it was
very.
very successful, right, in the sense of the soldiers were very successful.
Right.
But the North Vietnamese had moved the POWs.
Correct.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I want to ask about, you bring up the subject I wanted to ask about. O'Brien in his book talks a lot about fear and courage, and he writes a lot about speculation about what courage is and why people behave bravely in situations like that, in dangerous situations. Like, why is it? Why don't we? When I think about it, I think, well, I'd scream and run. When they said, "Now's the time to leave,"
So
and
did I.
I mean,
I can't imagine one of the special forces guys walking out of that room.
yeah,
I wasn't surprised.
yeah,
They're not that, they're different. They're a different breed.
yeah. What do you think that is? What is the? What made you guys stay there? What?
I just thought we were going out for beers.
I was gonna say, they probably told him, that, like he said, they didn't tell him a lot. They just
Yeah.
told him where they were going.
Where would be enough for me?
Yeah, but you wouldn't run. You wouldn't run.
You wouldn't run.
I myself,
It's part of being a soldier.
Part of
It
being a
just don't.
soldier.
and it boils down to training.
Yeah.
When I speak to groups today and ROTC groups and stuff like that, everybody hates training. It's
Right.
boredom. You get sick.
Right.
But I can tell you, we practiced 188 times doing this, and everybody knew exactly what they were going to do. And we had contentions in case one chopper went down, two choppers went down. We knew what we were going to do.
Right.
And one of the issues came up, we lost a chopper. We thought it had gone down, so we had to go to an alternate plan. But that did not disrupt the mission whatsoever because we had trained, and it was like clockwork.
If that
You-
happened, you knew
You
what to
knew
do.
exactly what you were going to do. Your responsibilities changed, but you knew what they were, and you rehearsed it enough. And that's what I tell. A football team doesn't hit the field without training.
Right.
And that's true in any sport, and it's true, the sport of the military is to defend. Knowing that you're trained and you know what the man to your left and the man to your right, and the trust that you have there, and there's no fraternity any better than the military. And that relationship that you have built in the time frame that you maybe only 2 weeks or 3 weeks you serve with someone, you build a relationship, you depend on them,
Right.
and that's so important
Right.
because you gotta trust the guy to your left and your right.
Right. O'Brien says soldiers fight for each other.
Okay,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
it's true.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, thank you.
And fear is a good.
And fear's a good
fear's
motivator.
Yeah, because I can tell you right now, I had a lot of fear.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's always here.
It's always there.
I never thought too much about fear while it was going on because I just figured everybody was as afraid as I was, I became a platoon leader when our platoon leader got shot, and shortly after that, one of the crew chiefs came in and said, kind of like the scene in Top Gun where Cougar throws his, I don't want to fly anymore, much the same thing. I don't want to fly anymore, Captain Cherry. I said, well, what? He said, I'm afraid. And I said, well, we're all afraid. He said, well, no, you're not afraid. You pilots aren't afraid. You're up front and diving in. I said, Harold, if you looked over and you could see my knees shaking and whatever, you didn't think. I never thought about it. I just thought everybody was the same as I was, and you were scared. But and that's why when you got through it, everything you just almost collapse. But it's a good motivator, and I think it's good to talk about it with your troops, especially after you lose someone.
Yeah.
You have to say, look, and he talks a lot about that, and he goes back almost like a refrain to that.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of it. That happens like that, and
Right.
and sometimes it. I didn't even realize that I was still that way 10 years after I came back. At the Christmas time, I was still thinking about the first guy we lost, who was
Really?
the rock around which we built the platoon. So.
Wow.
There comes a point when you stop, and while you're doing it, you don't really have a lot of time, but every once in a while, there's a point, a signal moment like that where the crew chief said, I started thinking about, I guess I am afraid, and I guess everybody doesn't want to talk about being scared, because
Right.
that's not a manly thing to do, type thing. And so some of that he talks about, and that's why I said he's a good writer. I felt some of the things that he's talking about.
Right.
I never had any cold sweat or anything like that, but some of the things that he talks about, he's got a really good way that kind of macabre in some ways he does it, but he's very good at it.
I'm describing, yeah.
He
yeah,
can
kind
get
of-
right into the feeling, yeah.
Yeah, macabre, you're right.
Yep.
He dwells on
Yep.
some of those things that, oh my goodness.
Yep.
But so one of the ways that you help others handle their fear is to get them to talk about it.
Exactly,
And-
yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. So that
Mhm.
they know they're not alone
Yep.
in that situation.
Mhm.
Yeah. In your service time, your service abroad or your war service, or O'Brien, of course, his title is the things they carry. And when he says that, he's talking about all kinds of things, of course, because being a literary kind of person, he talks about things like love letters, Kool-Aid, P-38 can openers, but also terrible fear, growing numbness to destruction, responsibility for the lives of their men or for the lives of their others. He says at one point they took up burdens that others could no longer carry. So I'd like for you guys to think about, during the time when you were abroad in your service, what you carried. And it can be something real that you always wanted to have with you. I know my football players usually have a good luck charm of some kind. Often it's dirty socks, I have to say. Wear the same socks all season. But anyway, it could be something physical, or it could be something mental, emotional, that you could say that you carry. Anybody?
I thought about this because a lot of the things he felt brought back some memories of things. Loneliness is one of the things you carry, at least I carried it in my earlier, because when I was overseas, there weren't that many women with us, and so sometimes I would have to do stuff by myself,
Right.
or which wasn't a problem, but it makes you miss your family,
Right.
and especially Christmas time.
Yeah.
Christmas time was really, I remember one Christmas for me in Korea, it was really lonely, and a bunch of us were hanging out in one of the hooches. We had Quonset huts as our BOQs, our quarters, so to speak. But I was always worried about my soldiers, always worried about them being as well as they could be,
Yeah.
emotionally, physically, all that stuff. But one thing I always carried with me, and you guys will probably laugh, Tabasco sauce.
Oh, you did, to make your food good.
You never know what you're going to eat, so you have to have that just in case. You, Tabasco? Did you have Tabasco?
No, I got a Tabasco
In your
sauce
kit
story,
was-
though. I have a story to go along with that.
I mean, it just was there. But as far as other things I carried with me, physical things, I always had my dog tags, which everybody does, but I always had them with me no matter where I went. And that kind of, some of my fellow soldiers didn't think they were that important when
Yeah.
we first came in, and they're just, they just want to control us. And I thought, what are you talking about? But anyway, that was Tabasco sauce was the most memorable physical thing I carried with me.
Was an important daily item that you...
Well, you never know. I mean, I was with the British for 2 years in Britain, which
Oh.
I was with the British Army, and
Gosh.
people, people say their food's awful. Well, it is, but it's not as awful in an officer's mess as it is out in the boonies. And then the Tabasco sauce came in helpful.
On everything.
Yes.
right? I would like to hear the Tabasco sauce story if
yes.
I may.
We we're flying around and we're pretty heavily engaged, and even with a helmet on and all the noise the helicopter makes, when a round hits a helicopter, it's just a thump. You know something's happened. And this was a rather big thump, so I knew something happened, so we started checking around and whatever. And all of a sudden, everybody in the crew could smell this smell. And I checked the gauges. You got a big master caution light, which would light up this room. Not really, but it makes you feel that way.
Yeah.
Everything checked. Checked the hydraulic system, recycled the hydraulic system. I got the wingman. I went up to 2,000 feet. He flew under to see if I was trailing any fuel or anything. So there was nothing, apparently, no fire, nothing, but we smelled something. It wasn't JP4. It wasn't hydraulic fuel. It wasn't oil. I said, I'm putting this thing on the ground. So we found a place that we thought was secure. The other gunship took up a counter-rotating orbit when we landed, and a round had come up. Pilots and co-pilots sat in an armor-plated seat with Kevlar, so you're pretty safe in your body parts, and you wore a chicken plate in front. A round had come up, a 50 caliber round. The 50 caliber is the bullet, the whole thing is about as long as that. The slug is about that long, and that's with a little lightweight helicopter. It doesn't take much, too many of them. So we knew we had been hit with a 50 caliber. Came right up behind the seat, and it went at the seat, and behind the seat you had places you could keep transmission oil and things like that. It had gone through and cut a bottle of Tabasco sauce in half, and it was all down the side of the helicopter. Every one of us knew the smell, but could not figure out. We were trying, in our mind, it had to be something that was making the helicopter run, not was
Right.
making our bodies run. So that's my hot sauce story right there.
Oh, no.
But I will bet you that most of the folks of our vintage were carrying Tabasco sauce.
Tabasco sauce, because it was
My
important.
my talisman was a 7.62 armor-piercing round that went through the second stage of my compressor the first time I was shot down. You get the engine shot out, you can auto-rotate, save the helicopter, everybody got out, no problem. So I had a hole drilled in that,
Yeah.
and that was on my dog tags for the rest of my first tour.
Yeah.
On my way back the second tour, my nephew gave me an orange rabbit's foot.
Oh.
And something you get, in a little penny arcade or whatever. Vile smelling because you wore around your neck all the time. My second tour, the morning that the day I got hurt,
Yeah,
I took my dog tags off as I was shaving in like a little crater,
right.
and my dog tags went missing. I don't remember taking them off, but I would take them off to shave.
Right.
And about 2 hours after I did that. So you can say what you want about good luck charms or whatever. I wouldn't tell anybody that I thought that kept me safe, whatever. But I don't know. It could be coincidence, maybe not.
But you didn't have it on when you
No,
got
I
hurt.
didn't. No, I
The
didn't.
fact is. Oh, my goodness, I love the Tabasco
Yep,
story.
yep.
Yeah. What did you carry on the, did you have anything that you?
Probably not much.
Not really.
Couldn't carry
We were
much.
very limited.
Yeah.
Weight was an issue,
Right.
and because of where we didn't know. Hopefully, we were going to bring back 70 POWs.
Right.
But we went in sterile, meaning no insignias, no rank, anything like that.
Oh, really?
And
What were you wearing? Just
fatigues.
fatigues
No,
and then
no steel
insignia?
pots, no armor,
Okay.
nothing like that.
Did
It
you
was
have
all.
the old jungle fatigues on? The old,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I had 14 concussion grenades. I had 2 frags. I had a little over 900 rounds of ammunition,
Wow.
and a Prick 25 radio. I was an RTO radio operator for our command element.
The radio was real heavy, wasn't it?
25 pounds.
Yeah.
I had 65 pounds
25
on
65
on me when I was. And you compare that to what our troops carry today, it's
Jeez.
nothing. I mean, our troops, we got such a great army.
Yeah.
I mean, and we just need to keep it that way.
Right.
But, I mean, I am so impressed with the military today. It's cut
So
above,
professional.
no doubt about it. Whether it's Special Forces, SEALs, whatever, it's The entire Army, I think, is great. But no, we didn't carry anything like that just because of, and we didn't even have dog tags. They didn't want our dog tags either.
Really?
Mhm.
Wow.
So we were.
You're special.
It was the idea was be clandestine about it
Right.
if something did happen. So
Wow. Yeah, that would be kind of scary too, because the idea would be if they lost somebody, the Vietnamese wouldn't have any information, right? They wouldn't have any information about who you were. Or,
right,
yeah.
They try.
Yeah.
yeah, they would try.
Right. Wow. Wow. Interesting. Okay. Thank you. I want to ask you about, I've got a lot of questions here, but we don't have infinite time. So I want to ask you about coming home. Because, for one thing, I've been reading a book about World War II soldiers coming home called Soldier from the War Returning. And it turns out that the greatest generation had a lot of problems when they came home. They sometimes couldn't find jobs, and sometimes they were emotionally affected by the war in important ways. And sometimes marriages didn't last, you know. And we've all heard the stories about Vietnam veterans. We know that most veterans adjusted to civilian life and carried on their lives, but we know that many carry a burden, and we know that our young soldiers today, some of them, just like some Vietnam veterans, didn't put their service on their resumes because people judged them and thought they were druggies or whatever if they did, and I've heard the same from young veterans now, that sometimes they don't, for fear that people will say they have PTSD, or that they might be explosive, or they might have drinking problems, or which I think is such a terrible thing, not to put your service on your resume. So let me ask you about homecoming. What was adjustment like when you came home from a foreign service?
Well, my first time, it was completely different. I didn't have a son when I left. I had a son when I came home.
How old was he?
He was 9 months old.
9 months old.
So that was different, and just being a father was a whole different. And I don't know whether I really noticed a lot, because when you came home, you just it's kind of a touch and go. You're off to a new assignment. We were off to school for a year, and then it was Germany, and it was many years before I went back to Vietnam. But having come home on 2 or 3 different occasions, one of the things that jumps out, you look around and you've been gone a year, and the lawn's cut, the car's maintained, the house is good, everything's put away, the kids are getting good grades. You kind of say, well, what the heck do they need me for? I mean, you honestly say, maybe it's just a thing that it couldn't happen without the man in the house being there or whatever. But that goes through your mind, like you didn't expect that for some reason, and you had no reason to feel that way. But
it's not that you don't want things to go well.
And I don't think anybody talked too much about what coming home was like. I saw some pictures of old movies and things like that, but the current generation of people coming home from Vietnam and then coming home from Desert Storm, whatever, you didn't talk too much about that. And if you did have something that was bothering you, well, you kind of kept it to yourself, because it wasn't kind of, I keep saying manly, it wasn't, soldierly to do that. But there's no feeling like it, though.
Coming
counting
home.
Days, everybody had a calendar, and now everybody, it's kind of neat. You can see your kids and your wife and talk to them and whatever. The mail was 7 days going one way and 8 or 9 days going the other way.
Yeah.
And we used to have these little reel-to-reel tapes, and you couldn't wait to get a tape. To listen, and late at night. And,
Hear a voice.
It was great.
Oh,
But the thing I noticed was, especially when I came home from the hospital, my wife would come see me about 3 times a week, and I come home and the house was running just like a ship. Everything was squared away and whatever, whether Dad was there or not, And
and you thought, what am I supposed to do?
that's okay. But it's good having someone to come home to. I know that.
Yeah. You mentioned several things that I know were important to the Vietnam veterans. One young man mentioned to journalist Mark Baker that there was no transitional thing that they bring you out of the jungle, they'd clean you up, they'd put you on a plane, and the next evening you'd have your legs under your mama's dining room table. He said, I went from the combat zone to the twilight zone because it was disorienting, you know. Did you guys have any transitional? No, just from just home, right?
I was thinking of a story. A really good friend of mine. We went to high school together in Japan, and he was a helicopter pilot in Vietnam, and he was a member, as is Stan, of the Vietnam Helicopter Pilots Association, and Ken is his name, and he had a really hard time when he came back.
Yeah.
And he's a couple years older than I was in high school, but he took it literally that the civilian population didn't appreciate what we did over there, and he carried a lot of anger.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was interesting to watch the activities at this, and they had a reunion in Kansas City, so he asked me to go with him, and it was quite an experience. Of course, he told me not to tell anybody I was in the service.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Wow.
because I was still active duty, and they were all warrant officers, and he
Right.
said, don't tell them that you're an officer.
Yeah. Oh.
And I thought that was really funny. But anyway, 5 years later, he killed himself.
Oh, no. Oh,
You know,
no.
but what was so neat about his visit is that they had planned, the association had planned, they had a coming home parade in Parkville
Oh, they did.
for all these
Wow.
guys.
Yeah.
And they all cried.
Oh.
The guys that were marching.
Right.
And I just thought this was, I just couldn't fathom why
Yeah.
they felt this way.
Yeah.
And most of them said no one ever welcomed us home.
Oh, yes.
And
no.
I thought, and this was like in 1990, I think,
Right.
maybe.
I've encountered
That's
statements
interesting.
like that too.
That was
I've
interesting. And I was so upset. Of course, you can't tell what people are going to do.
Right.
You can't tell what their feelings are going to be.
Right.
And it was just 2-3 years ago that they found him dead at his dining room table,
That's
and that
terrible.
he had taken an overdose.
Oh, my goodness.
And I thought, this was 60. It was 30
years
40 years ago.
later.
But
Yeah.
he carried it.
But
And
he carried it.
He said he lost a lot of good friends, and I was telling him that he'd said he had lost 12 of his his pilots who were friends of his.
Wow.
And they were all warrants. They did what we call dust off, like he's mentioned, dust off pilots.
Right.
But
Wow.
hey,
Oh, that's a tragic story.
it is.
It
But
is. Yeah.
I just remember the parade they were all just
'Cause they were
smiling.
weeping,
It was
yeah.
just so neat
Wow.
then.
Wow.
For me, it was no big deal.
Yeah. Not,
I mean, because I just came home from Korea, which was like being in another world totally.
Right.
But I had orders to go the other direction overseas, so I didn't stay. I just, like you said, you just
Just
dust
come
yourself
home and
off,
then you're-
go again.
pack your bags and
Yeah.
off you go. Wow.
It happens when you're single sometimes in the Army. They send you wherever they want.
Because you're single.
Because you don't have to if you don't have a family, you don't have to worry.
You don't worry. How
Never,
about you,
never
Joe?
mind.
Never
Well,
mind.
I kind of go back to World War II. My father was in World War II, and
Yeah.
for 42 months, he didn't see family.
Right.
It is
And you
amazing,
go
right?
back and
It's
you think about
amazing.
what those men and the women went through back then compared to today's. When my daughter was in Afghanistan, going back to the technology, we Skyped once a week.
Yeah.
And it was great for us. There's a positive and a negative, when I could tell when my daughter was down,
Yeah.
and you're sitting here, as her papa,
Yeah.
you're going, I can't protect my daughter, and you kind of feel a little helpless, but hey, she's doing what she's supposed to be doing, and so that's it. But I call this my most memorable moment.
Yeah.
And the most memorable moment I had when I came back from the raid was when we landed at Pope Air Force Base. And, I was 20 years old, single, no carefree, nothing footloose and fancy free, so to speak. But the gentleman that walked off that plane, there was guys that had daughters my age.
Wow.
And I was very fortunate to serve with some of the best, most elite group of special forces at that time with Bull Simons and Colonel Sidnor and Dick Meadows.
Yeah.
But-
Legendary people.
Yes, but what impressed me the most was the fact that these men that were, in their 40s, some in their 50s, Pappy Kittleson, were had given up their families and the fact that they may not come back
Right,
to free someone that they didn't even know.
right.
And that just made an impact on me, that's true military, that's true patriotism.
Right.
And today, we have that same spirit in the military. That these guys and women know what they're doing and know that what can end up fatal for them are willing to do it for us.
And
And the sad thing is, 1% of this country goes to war
right,
or even goes to the military.
right.
I'm a firm believer of the draft, and I was a draftee.
So I wanted to ask how you feel about the draft now.
I think the worst thing this country did was do away with the draft. And I've got some military friends that disagree with me, but I think, and I don't want to see anybody go to war, but I think from the discipline you get, the education that you get, and the fact that you grow up, I think it'd get rid of a lot of the gangs that we have in this country, and people would be appreciative of what this country is about. And I think we've lost our patriotism about what this country means to us.
I think more people would finish college the first time they started if they had to spend 2 years.
Best thing that ever happened to me. I couldn't afford to go into college without the GI Bill.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
but that was my,
That was your thought when you
Yeah.
landed there.
Sometimes America gets a bad rap for not learning how to do something.
Yeah.
I had the good fortune of coming home from Vietnam twice, and then also coming home from Desert Storm.
Right.
And the National Victory Day celebration, getting to walk up Constitution Avenue and salute the President of the United States. And then 2 days later, marching all the way up Broadway, it's 6 inches deep of confetti.
Confetti.
7 million people were watching you. I mean, if you had a uniform on that day, I mean, you really, I was given a ride. I've got a right below the knee prosthesis, so the 4 or 5 miles in Washington, and then another 2 or 3 miles up
long
there.
walk.
I was kind of hurting a little bit, so I caught a cab back to the hotel.
Yeah.
And the cab driver was of Russian extraction. He's kind of like this Smirnoff, the comedian. What I come to, I thought that was the guy. He would not
Yakov.
let me pay him for the ride.
Really?
He would not, and
Wow.
I left a $20 bill on the seat because the bill was almost $20. But he said, no, if you got a uniform, he says, I'm an immigrant, and he said, I appreciate it. But the feeling that gave, and that's why when you see these ads on TV now, the youngins coming through the train station and everybody stops, that really means a lot to the folks that came back from Vietnam. It really does.
Right.
And but America learned, and you see it now, all the things that are, people are proud of their soldiers and are proud of what they're doing, regardless of that few that don't do that.
and to echo with what the general just said is, and I attribute that to the Vietnam veterans.
I
The
think so.
Vietnam veterans
Yeah.
that I know,
Yeah.
when my daughter came back, the Patriot Guard met her at the airport.
Wow. Isn't that
And
nice?
it
Yep.
brought me to tears.
Right.
Yep, you bet.
And to see that,
Talking about the motorcycle, you talk
Yeah.
about the motorcycle group?
yes,
Yep.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, we have a bunch of Leavenworth.
they just, I mean, that was icing on the cake, and she was just in awe, I mean, shocked.
That's
She
good
wasn't
stuff.
expecting it.
Wow.
But-
And that was the parade, that was the Desert Storm return, right?
Yes, yes.
The
mhm.
Vietnam return was very different, wasn't
Mhm.
it?
Oh, yeah,
It was,
yeah.
Right.
yeah, one
Very
of the.
different.
Very different. One of the young soldiers told Mark Baker, the journalist, that if he started to talk about Vietnam, that people acted embarrassed.
Yeah.
He said they just didn't really want to hear, Did you have that?
I just remember when I was teaching up at the staff college, we would get into conversations, and there's a block of instruction that we teach on Vietnam, and we're talking about, and of course we show videos and everything, and some of the majors would comment, I just can't imagine how horrible those soldiers felt. And because I have to tell you, every time when I've been back, of course some of them have been gone 2 or 3 times to Iraq or Afghanistan.
Right.
And they said,
5 or
I was
6.
always felt welcomed home to America, but would get into really heavy discussions about the feelings and emotions about that time. And I said, it was really funny, especially if you were not in the military. A lot of people didn't care about what we did over there.
Yeah.
Why in the heck are we over there? You know, that kind of stuff.
Where is it? Where is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Why do we care about that country? You know, that type of thing.
Absolutely. And coming home for you was,
Well, I came back, went right back to my unit, and actually, we were
So you left and came back.
when we initially were debriefed, and it was going to be another mission of SF operations, and
Right.
and then Hanoi came on and said they'd been bombed. Well, that changed the whole complexity of the mission. Was then released to the public, and it was turned into a propaganda for the United States at that time.
okay.
What we've
Yeah.
done, and it was good for the POWs. That was the best thing that came out of it.
an encouraging thing. That
Yes,
they,
correct.
Yeah.
But, initially, we were, just like any special mission, you're debriefed and you go back to your unit, and it didn't happen.
And it didn't happen.
Right.
Right.
But this was unique in that,
Yeah. In that there was a publicity.
had
Yeah.
Hanoi not come out and said what they did, you'd never heard of Sante.
Wow, that's interesting, isn't it? Until maybe 20 years later in the history books, right?
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. But when you did come back, was there anything that you carried home with you? I could be could be a memento of your service, or it could be a feeling that you carried back with you, or it can be real or not real. It's something that you carry from your time in the military, good or bad, physical or emotional.
Well, the only thing I felt, when we came back from the raid was just disappointment.
Because the
Yeah.
Right.
POWs had been moved.
But then, once you had, after I got out years later, we started meeting with the POWs and to hear their story and to hear them tell about what it meant to them, it changes. I mean, it was like, and that was for every raider.
Yeah.
Well, they'll tell you that it was like, boy, we did do something more than we anticipated doing, and
That's good. They knew they weren't forgotten.
right,
That
exactly.
the country was.
I was
Yeah.
telling the general, one of our commanders of the senior ranking officer at the POW camp, when we get together every 2 years, and
Yeah.
this is before he passed away, but he got up and told all the raiders that one of the most important things was he was able to tell the POWs that were under him that, these guys came once, they'll come again. So that
Right.
was the hope that, you got to remember, these guys have been held captive 6-7 years.
Right.
And some of the guys even admitted that they were at the point where they were ready to give it up because they didn't think they were
Felt
ever be
hopeless.
going. Yeah, it's hopeless.
Yeah.
So
So it would be hope for people
Mhm.
in terrible situations without much
Right.
chance of hope.
yeah,
That's nice that I like the story that the POWs met with the Raiders. I think that's such a good thing for them and for you all to
yeah,
hear.
it was. It
Yeah.
still is. I mean, they're brothers. Is
Yeah.
what it boils down to.
Yeah, yeah. What else? What did you carry home?
Well, I was a lot closer, I think, to this CW, it's Chief Warrant Officer Tom Sandifer. He was a little bit older. I was 25. I guess he was early 30s. Had been a crew chief for many years. Probably knew how to fly a helicopter before he went to flight school.
Right.
And he was really the guts around which the platoon leader, who became the company commander the day we deployed,
Yeah.
built the platoon. He was the first person killed in the unit, first day at Tet. And it was traumatic there and whatever, and it would only affect me around Christmas time, because I remember we had the Christmas Day, Bob Hope came to Bearcat, Vietnam in
Yeah.
1967, and I remember Christmas morning and whatever. And I kind of carried that with me about 15 years, I guess. And it wasn't until we had a reunion, and we happened to have the reunion in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Yeah.
And on Sunday morning, we had a very small requiem mass right at the gravesite of CW2, Sandifer's, his sisters, and his aunt and his cousins were there.
Were there.
And that was the point. You see it in Top Gun where he finally lets Goose. Finally, he can let it go. It wasn't really quite like that, but I haven't really thought about it much since then. And
Really?
that was it took 10, 12 years, and I've never. My wife saw it every holiday. I just kind of withdraw a little bit and off to myself, but. And that's what some of the. We have a local chaplain here, Kerry Sanford, Chaplain Sanford. He's a legend, and he has his own little church, and he has a PTSD dinner once a month, and he has folks come in and talk about their experiences, whatever. And
Wow.
and I was there, and I asked if anybody had any questions, and they didn't. But after the dinner was over, there were about 12 people that wanted to have just a one-on-one.
Yeah.
That wanted to just go off in the side and just kind of bounce it off you to see if,
Right.
and that was good for both us, myself, and the 10 or 12 guys I talked to.
Yeah. Once
And,
again, as you said about fear, talking about it.
Yep, and
Yeah.
that's why when General Ham, Carter Ham, 4-star,
Yeah.
actually realized when he had this little pet, I don't know, schnauzer or some kind of poodle little dog or what he was really very fond of.
Yeah.
And when he came home from Afghanistan, it was probably his 3rd tour, he just, his wife noticed he didn't want anything to do with the dog.
Really? Wow.
And he went and got help and wasn't shy about saying that. So when senior officers like that can do that, it kind of because you don't want the stigma of saying you need help, I guess,
Right.
but I guess now it's quite common. People talk about it and they get the help you need.
It's interesting to think about the part of the, like old war movies kind of suggest that leadership is the stiff upper lip and never show. But it turns out that leadership is being able to share that you feel the way your soldiers
Not
do.
too many patents.
No.
I've run across a few, though.
Oh yeah.
She doesn't sound real cheerful about it. What did you carry home, Sharon?
Well, I'm just thinking of the gunfighter, General Emerson.
Yeah.
He was commander of Second Infantry Division in Korea, and he carried his 2 silver pistols, and he was, my big run-in with him as an individual was when back then our secure voice communications was very different, and you had to talk slowly to get it through the system, and we're talking from Korea back to Washington D.C. So it was always a time issue. So, and of course, I was in Seoul, and his headquarters are up in Tondashan, or now Dondashan, right near, up near the DMZ.
Oh, okay.
But anyway, he got excited one time when he was talking to someone. And of course, my operators operate the system,
Right.
and one of them came running into my office and said, ma'am, you got to come. He said, General Emerson's on there, and he's lit up the board, which means it burns it up.
Oh, really? He's burning up the...
You have to follow protocol on radio. Back then, we had little different things, and so I pulled the plug.
Oh, you unplugged him.
I pulled the plug on him. So within 2 days, I saw General Stilwell, who was the commander in 8th Army. I saw the brigade commander. They started from my battalion commander all the way up, yelling at me, Scott. They'll call me Scotty. I said, Scotty, what the hell do you think you're doing? I said, I am not going to lose a $1,000 piece of equipment over a general who doesn't want to follow instructions. And I was counseled, formally counseled. No, I didn't lose my job, but I thought sure I was going back, as we call it, back to the world.
Yeah.
I was going back to the world, and I would never see the Army again. But I survived.
Back to the world is a good
That's
expression.
what we called it,
I
back
like
to the
that.
world.
I like that.
But I've never forgotten him because he wanted to know who I was. What's this woman doing pulling the
Pulling the
He didn't
plug.
say who's this captain. He just said who's this woman.
Who's this woman?
Yeah, so I thought
Oh, that's funny. I love that.
typical.
I love it.
Back then it was very typical.
It's very typical.
Yeah.
I have a last question I want to ask you, but first I want to see if our audience has any questions that you'd like to ask of our panel.
I've got a question for Mr. Buckler. Going into the raid, you said that you were sanitized, how were you prepared mentally? As far as, when they were told, hey, 50-50 shot, and you're coming back, mentally, how are you prepared as far as, hey, if I get captured, what are you allowed to, name, rank, serial number, or what kind of things like that, where you just,
Well, when the Bull Simons, our escape and evasion plan was to back up, at that point, the Sauk Riggenberg was right behind the Sante POW camp. And it was a flat piece of ground, and the Bull had told us that if anything, we would know by the time the second chopper landed whether there was a security breach. And if there was, there was no way they would get us back from where we were at. I mean, we're 23 miles north of Hanoi. So what they Bull told us to back up to the river, and we'd make it as bloody as we could for that time frame. From my perspective, I knew that your faith comes into play, and you have a lot to. 3.5 hour ride in, you get right with the man upstairs, and you knew this was what it's about. And I had one of the things we did before we left, when we left Eglin, you do your last wills, which is just pretty much normal for any military going into combat, and that's all been done. I had written a letter to my parents in case something did happen to me. I knew that they would want to know because they had no clue where I was at, and I left it with a friend of mine, and if anything happened, he was to mail it to my folks. But you take that out of your mind after, when you're in combat. You don't think about things like that. It's just you do your job because the guy next to you is depending on you, and it actually was like a rehearsal to me, and the fear really didn't strike me till we lifted up, and our bird lifted and turned south, and it was looking over the lights of Hanoi like you were looking over the lights of Kansas City.
Wow, wow.
And we hadn't been in the air 3 or 4 minutes, and about that time our chopper just dropped, and they'd fired a couple of SAM missiles at us, and I had no idea what a SAM missile was at that time, because I asked Di William, my captain, what it was, and there was a PJ sitting on the door gun, we was on H-53s, and he said it was a SAM, and as soon as that, I knew what he was talking about then, and we had the greatest pilots there were. I mean,
Wow.
they got us in and out.
Were you a private?
I was a buck sergeant.
Buck sergeant?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was the
Wow.
youngest on the raid.
I was
and,
gonna say, that's pretty, for 20 as buck sergeant, that's pretty good.
20 years old.
Yeah. Well, Special Forces, your
I know.
lowest rank is a buck sergeant, so I was a private. And,
You was a private, yeah.
That's in comparison.
yeah, right, yeah.
Thank you.
but as far as like, if you had been captured,
I was not going to be captured. I knew that. I had made a decision prior to that I carried a 45 as well, and I knew what a 45 would do, and I knew the buck sergeants aren't very useful to the North Vietnamese, and I would have been somebody's playboy or worse. So I had made my decision that if anything like that happened, I knew what my outcome would be.
Kind of sounds like the people in charge had made that decision too, and they said to make it as bloody as you could, if it was clear that you wouldn't get out.
Yep,
Right? They
exactly.
meant you to fight.
Our mission was to take no prisoners
Yeah.
from the other side.
Right.
So
So you didn't expect.
didn't
to-
right
Yeah, yeah.
exactly. So,
Good.
mhm.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for your service. It's just an honor to be here, and it's so exciting.
Nice to see you wearing an eagle.
Well, and my caveat to that is I don't think I would be where I am today without people like you, because it's been not an easy road, and you've made mention to a lot of that. I'm single, and I'll tell you, I don't think a lot of people really wanted us to succeed as single service members
No.
in whole. Because, once again, it's kind of like issue you the spouse at the beginning, and hopefully that works out to the end. But I need some advice on how you think we can ramp this around to the younger generation, and using all the history and incorporate with the book. The book was not unfamiliar with, he said a rabbit's foot, I had my thing, and you know, and everyone has their own. But yet, I think right now, we're really suffering from some of the things that there's no fixes to, and one of them is suicide.
Yeah.
So, you had nothing, you hardly had anything, you had death orders, you know, that type of thing. You were a pilot, same situation, if you were captured, you know, they were gonna be heavily sequestered to pain and suffering, and we give the soldiers the whole 9 yards, we give them everything. You say the greatest army, but I don't think we're mentally capable of handling some of these burdens.
Are we giving them enough when they get back?
I would say we've made a lot of headway in this last conflict, okay, but some folks don't know they have the problem. Someone has to be near them to recognize it, so that comes in where the wife spotted the dog, and because she didn't pick up on it, see? So when you talk about everyone coming home, this family's on eggshells, so they spend, you know, the next year going, was it me, is it the kids, is it the dog, and they don't know. And sometimes that's that critical stage, so, and we don't know, we just think everyone's going through what we're going through. They really do, because I thought everyone was going through what I was going through.
Right.
And my family backed off, my parents and such, were like, okay, leave her alone for a little while. But yet, you know, 6 years later, and I've sought help. I've sought help, but I don't know how that it didn't go to the edge of where we're finding our soldiers. The suicide rates are out there now. That's only because we started
Yeah.
calculating them, capturing them. We
Yeah.
never did before. So we have the statistics, but and then they always say, well, it's got to get worse before it gets better. So, you know, fast forward, we're now suffering from a sexual assault.
Which we did then as well.
Right. And again, it's coming out now, you know, but what people, the stigma is it was women.
Yeah.
It is not.
No.
It's men on men. The men are sexually assaulting the men. No. You know, so, like, everyone doesn't even get that. So, not too many men are gonna come to the table. I mean, the women are surfacing quicker, because they heal, in a sense, a little quicker. But, ran into someone that works for me last 2 years. She goes, I'm so sorry, I've been out of touch. I just got a mission to deploy on a TDY, quick month or to the same place where I got sexually assaulted at 5 years ago, because I couldn't go. I'm like, I didn't know that. You know, like, meaning not that, but why she didn't go to the mission, which we could have diverted that prior to, and the mission wouldn't have not gone off and all that. So young kids sit in the room is why I kind of brought that up.
Right.
Are they, and you go back and you talk about the draft, they're not opting into this whole thing.
One of the things that I hear, and I hear this from my daughter and her husband, who are both first lieutenants up for captain, and my daughter tells me one of the greatest things she's enjoyed was when she was a platoon leader. She said she really had the opportunity to help her troops.
Yep.
Now that she's not a platoon leader, she says it's like the most boring job I've got.
Really?
And she's very disappointed in the
Well,
military.
tell her above if captain is the best rank ever, and above that, unless you command.
Well,
no,
that,
she's right.
and that's the sad part
My
about
experience.
it. You know, I talked to some, we had an A-team come up here from Campbell the other day for the Sante Raiders. And I was talking to a couple of the E7s and E8s on it. And I asked them, you know, what's life like in the military now? You know, from my perspective. And they said, well, you know, everybody's worried about their promotions. That's all they want to worry about. You know, once they get up to that rank, and you know, I can appreciate people wanting to move forward in their ranks. I mean, that's what everybody wants to do, but you have to take care of your men first. And the one thing I always admired about Special Forces is they did take care of their men. But when I heard this E7 and E8 saying, you know, once you get up to an E9, it's because the E9s there's a lot of E9s in SF, and they always took care of the guys
Yes,
too.
right.
But and the answer to that, I think, is going to have to come from officers and in the upper ranks as well, to realize that we're losing good people and good troops. And, I mean, you spend all this money training them, and then they get out, and that's not good. And the
But see,
sequestration is killing us.
But you also have to remember, we spend good money and we train them, and then they do really well and get good reports, and then they get pink slips.
Oh, I agree,
Yeah,
and that
that's-
should never
that's-
happen.
You know, with the SERB that I went through was in '91, and then we had some others since then. But what's going on now? I'll be honest with y'all, I'm kind of worried about whether we'll have much of an army left.
Well, I think that's a problem right there.
What do you think, Steve?
One of the things that the public needs to know, and I went through the system and the medical system, Army medicine is, you got to be banged up really badly to appreciate it, I guess.
Yeah.
But we were getting, I didn't go to Walter Reed, I went to Valley Forge. Valley Forge is a big amputee center, Walter Reed, Tripler, and I guess the one out at Carson, Fitzsimmons, I guess it is. And,
Yeah, Fitzsimmons.
but the medicine, when I look at the doctors, the chief of orthopedics went on to be the Surgeon General of the Army. The hospital commander went on to be the health services commander. When I get fitted for a prosthesis, people look at my leg and they ask, who did the surgery? And I say, Dr. Jim Herndon. The Dr. Herndon.
Wow.
He's one of the foremost orthopods in the world, and it's only gotten better. I was in the hospital at Walter Reed for about a week, 3.5 years ago. And I went down to the amputee physical therapy. There were 105 amputees in there working out when I got there. 4 triple amputees. We only had one the whole time I was there. But now we're saving people that are
People
banged up
survive.
badly. But the physical therapy and the follow-on medicine and the care you get up until the time I left Munson here and made the shift over to the VA. And people, a lot of bad reports about the VA. The VA here does an outstanding job.
I've been with them.
So
I've
the
been with
medicine,
them a long
that's a
time.
good news story, but we're playing catch up with the PTSD, and I'm not sure that science is where it needs to be as far along as when you look at just the prosthetics that I've had since I got hurt when I was 26 years old. I'm 73 now. I mean, it's state of the art.
That science has really moved forward.
And they really take good care of our people who are banged up. I know. Yeah, I know. I just
behind you, that's
when
why.
I crawl out of bed in the morning, my teeth aren't in the glass. I'm a happy camper.
That's right. That's exactly.
I'd like to ask you folks one final question, and brought up kind of by your question, since we need to wrap things up. I'd like to say first of all that we got lucky tonight. We not only got 3 distinguished veterans, but you're all good storytellers, so this is great.
Oh, yeah.
Part of being a veteran.
That's perfect.
It's part of being a veteran.
There you go.
So-
War stories.
Trust me, we have many.
Okay. But I wanted to ask you, just briefly, if you could think for a minute, what advice would you give a young person nowadays who wants to enter the service? Is there something you can encapsulate? Like, what would you say to the person? Maybe not advice, but what would you say?
Well, when I speak to ROTC students, you know, I tell them, to me, they are entering the most, in my mind, one of the best careers they can have. Now, I'm not, and I also just reiterate, I was not a career officer or soldier, but to me, it's still one of the best, if not the best, profession you can get into. But it requires that you have to make commitments and sacrifices. And going back to what the general was saying about when he came back and the house was running smooth, my biggest, I always say, the biggest heroes I see are the wives of these men, because these guys have volunteered to go out and fight and do these things, but the wife didn't sign on for that. And they stay home and, you know, make the house run and do all that. And so that's an important part of a family. But to the young troops today is, you know, you're going to get sick of training, but training's what it's all about. And someday you're going to appreciate it when the bullets start flying and you remember what to do. You're going to be thankful that somebody made you do that over and over and over till it was reactionary instead of, you know, an involuntary type of deal. But it's still great. I mean, the military has got a great retirement program if they continue with what they're doing, and you know, the benefits are great. And you know, after you serve your 20, you can still go out and have another job or a career. You know, I didn't have my daughter till I was 38. So, you know, you have time to do all that stuff after the military even. And I have a daughter that I've been trying to tell her to stay in, but I think she's going to stay in the reserves, I think. But, you know, I keep saying, you know, stay active. But,
Great careers.
yeah, and she is, I think she could end up being a general. She's just got a great attitude and about what she does, and she's top dog all the way. And she gets that from her mom, not me. So.
How about you folks?
I've talked to a bunch of ROTC guys at KU when I was teaching there. A friend of mine was what we call the PMS, the head of the military ROTC program. And I have to be honest with you, I often took the young women aside and talked to them. And I told them, if there's one word you have to decide on that you're going to, besides when you make a decision, sticking with it, is resilience. You'll run in, I would tell them that it takes a lot to survive and do well, but it all depends on you, how well you do your job. Think about what your job is, what your mission is, and do it 10 times better than you think you can. And I've said that to women for many, many years, and I said, because at times, and I don't know if you've experienced this, at times young women officers have to do things 10 times better than a guy to be approved, just to get approved. But that has changed over time. Some, not as much as would have liked to have seen it, because I said, if by the time I used to say, by the time I retire, women are going to be equal across the board. You know,
Across the board,
like this,
it's gonna
you know.
be-
Because I got tired, and I honestly did get tired, physically and emotionally tired of having to battle to show some male general
You see who's sitting in the middle, right?
that I could do my job. I got tired of having to, just fight, and just to be able to be assigned where some of the women are today, I would have loved it, but we weren't allowed to do it. The big thing is brigade and below,
Right.
because we're close to the soldiers. Women weren't allowed to be in brigades,
Right.
especially combat brigades. Oh, no way.
And never.
So I always try to tell women today, because I've talked to a few I hate to say girls, ladies recently who were like doing this about whether
Right.
they wanted, whether they wanted to stay or not,
Right.
or whether they wanted to do that. And I said, you have to look at the reasons why you're joining the service.
Right.
If you're looking to get a husband, that's not a reason. And these types of things. And a lot of, someone, well, there's so many cute Army guys. There's a lot of cute guys everywhere. You don't have to go in the Army to do that. So, I try to maintain a sense of humor with them, but also let them know that as an individual, you have to decide what you can contribute, because guess what? It ain't I anymore.
Right.
It's we,
Right.
and you're a team.
Right.
So you have to. It's no more you're going to be noticed,
Right.
and they make faces, but you can tell they're thinking about it.
It makes them think.
Oh, I've had some great times talking. They're just the best. They're best. The young folks and the guys are just great. They really are.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure. Sorry, it goes too long.
No, it's good. It's good.
Anything that I recommend, I have to look at it like it's what I would probably do if I was that age now.
Yeah.
And this is probably heresy, but I try to become a Marine.
Really?
No, I would.
Yeah, I would too.
You don't join the Marine Corps, you become a Marine.
You become a
I
Marine.
see.
And I like what I see with the enlisted Marines, the non-commissioned officers. Their senior officers have not, I won't say in the main, but in the main they have not. They're a little less prone to knuckle under to political correctness.
Yep.
Once you're a Marine, they know what you went through to become a Marine. And you can't just become a soldier either. I mean, there's some investment there. But they have that magic spark that only the Marines have. I would like to have tried to become a Marine, and I always rue the fact that I would like to have been, I should have gone in the Army. I should have been drafted or enlisted because I wasn't ready for college. I went to college to play baseball and football. That's,
I went to school
not,
to party,
not
so-
prepared for it.
That was my undergraduate.
But being a sergeant, a non-commissioned officer, and earn the right to become an officer, but a Marine, my brother-in-law was a 28-year Marine, Master Gunny Sergeant when he retired, and we used to talk about that a lot. And but I wouldn't force anybody to win. I would just tell them, when they sent me off to recruiting with 8 fingers and a wooden leg, are you kidding me? This is for a volunteer army?
This is to recruit people.
No, kind of. Once again, I'll use the term macabre thing to do.
Yeah.
But it was. I talked to parents, and that was when we went from 60% Cat 4s down to 25%, and then no Cat 4s, military
Cat
category
4s.
4.
what a Cat 4 is?
The parents would want to know why did you stay in the Army, and I really wasn't giving them a line. I stayed in it because I really loved the Army, and I only had a little taste of it, and I wasn't ready to quit yet.
Right.
But I think I'd recommend the Marine Corps, and don't tell any of my senior Army
We
friends.
won't
saying-
tell. We won't tell at
No,
all.
okay, all right.
We're not videotaping.
My wife
it or
knows.
anything.
I have a nephew's a Marine, so I agree with him. He's
I
just-
tried to talk my daughter to go to the Air Force because it's great food.
And their
Great
VOPs
food.
are good.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today,
this has
and
been
thank you for coming.
It's been a
We'd
pleasure.
like to thank you for
It's
your
fun.
for your service to your country, but also to your community and
No, it's good.
and
It's
to
good.
us
It's fun.
today. So
Cool.
thank you so much.
You can wake up now. I saw like you.